partner, head attorney at the law office of Dennis Arbitrano Jr. LLC. We are a family law litigation and divorce law firm. We have offices in Ulster County, Kingston, in Poughkeepsie, and also an office in Beacon. We handle cases as far north as Saratoga County, as far south as New York County, and pretty much everything in between, and have cases pending in pretty much every single one of those counties, but for the extreme upstate jurisdictions right now, and I've handled cases in virtually all of those jurisdictions, not only for family law litigation, but also for divorce cases. So I'm here tonight to just describe, give you a synopsis as to what's involved in a divorce case, and some of the issues that you'll be encountering, and just so you understand how these cases work, because it's very important. Divorces are comprised of a number of different things. One, first and foremost, do you have grounds to get the divorce? Okay. The law changed pretty substantially around 2009-2010 to provide for basically New York's version of no-fault divorce, which is irretrievable breakdown of the marital relationship for more than 6 months. So essentially in today's day and age, you no longer need to really prove fault to get a divorce in New York State. You used to have to prove grounds like infidelity, which is basically your spouse cheated on you, abandonment. I'm sure people have heard that before. I had a lot of clients come in, well, my spouse says she can get me for abandonment. Well, that doesn't really matter if all you want to do is get the divorce and you consent to the divorce, except to the extent that it involves custody and visitation issues, which we'll talk about momentarily. Also, living separate and apart pursuant to a separation agreement, being imprisoned for more than 3 years, cruel and inhumane treatment. Those are all the grounds that you used to have to prove in New York State to get a divorce, okay? But now, as I said before, we have irretrievable breakdown of the marital relationship for more than 6 months, which is New York's version of no-fault divorce. Bottom line is, if you want to get divorced in New York State in today's day and age, you will be able to get divorced. Other issues involved in a divorce case are equitable distribution, which is division of marital assets. That means pretty much anything into the marital relationship, anything out. It's positive and it's negative. So any assets, any liabilities. And that means anything that came into the marital relationship in your name, or your spouse's name, or both names, from the date of the marriage until the date of the commencement of the divorce, or the date of your separation agreement. That's the relevant time frame.
Only point A to point B when you get married to you.
Date of marriage, date of commencement. Now, there is some variable that could allow you to have the asset valued after date of commencement if it's something called a passive asset, something like a stock that's going up and down, not due to any marital efforts, but simply due to market forces. But that's a more complex discussion, I think, for a later date. But generally speaking, date of marriage to date of commencement. Anything that came into your name, her name, both names, of any sort of value. So you bought a house, it's got a value, it's a marital asset, subject to equitable distribution. You bought a car, you took out a home equity loan, you got credit card debt, you have a pension, an annuity, a timeshare, dishes, jewelry, rental property, pretty much anything. Okay? Again, anything in, anything out, positive, negative. Asset, liability. There's only a handful of exceptions to marital property for equitable distribution purposes. One, if you owned anything prior to the marriage, that's considered separate property, and as long as you keep it separate property, it's yours and yours alone. Personal injury recoveries.
What do you mean by keeping it as long as you keep it separate property?
Well, let's say this. You have a separate house. It was given to you by your parents before you got married. You don't use any marital funds to pay for the carrying costs or the taxes or any of those things, and you keep that in your name and your name alone, that continues to be separate property. That is yours and yours alone. Okay? And we'll talk about something called transmutation in a moment to explain there's how that issue can change depending upon the character of the particular asset. So, anything that comes into the marital relationship, unless it's separate property, also unless it's a personal injury recovery, which is separate property automatically, or a gift from somebody other than your spouse, or any inheritance. Any of those things are considered separate property. They're yours and yours alone, as long as you keep them separate. So I've had clients that come to me and say, well, you know, Dennis, my great-grandfather gave me a house before I was married, and then after I got married, I changed it from just my name into mine and my wife's name. And the word that I use when I describe that situation is called transmutation. What that means is you've now taken a separate piece of property and you have now made it marital property. Now, the difference there is it's subject to equitable distribution. It's something that needs to be divided. In a situation where you're in a long-term marriage, which means anything more than 10 years, equitable distribution is presumed to be 50-50. So, you've been married since 1975. You decide to get married, or you decide to get divorced, in 2014. Okay? Long-term marriage, right? So, the pension plans, the annuity, the rental property, the cars, the jewelry, the house, all those things are subject to equitable distribution, except for the exceptions I spoke about earlier. And the equitable distribution is presumed to be 50-50. So the equity in the house is $100,000, $50,000 to wife, $50,000 to husband. Pensions were $250, $125 to husband, $125 to wife. So again, equitable distribution, long-term marriage, presumed to be 50-50. If, however, there's some combination of those things, which you certainly have, so you have a separate piece of property. That property has nothing on it when you get married. Now you get married. You together build a house on that property, still in your name. You make that house really nice. You put on a deck. You put in a pool. That property, when you got married, was worth $100,000. Now, you've been married 25 years. Deed's still in your name, still technically separate property, right? But for the fact that now, with all those improvements, that property is worth $250,000. So now the difference in the increase in that value from the $100,000 piece of property to the $250,000 piece of property, which means an increase in $150,000, is now, if it were a long-term marriage, to be divided 50-50 between the two spouses, so long as what was used was some form of marital efforts to increase the value in that property. So the corpus, the original $100,000, that's yours and yours alone. That's separate property, you kept a separate deed, right? Just in your name. But the improvements that you did together as a married couple, using your income and your spouse's income, and anything you worked on together, that increase in value, that now is subject to equitable distribution. And if it's a long-term marriage, you're talking roughly 50-50.
What do you do in a situation where it's underwater? Like, we bought a house in June of '08, put a ton of money into it, and we'll never get even what we owe. So.
And if it's underwater, that's a more complex discussion, because a lot of the things that will come into something like that are short sales, foreclosures, bankruptcies. Do you have other debt? Are there other assets out there? And those aren't really things that fit, strictly and distinctly within matrimonial law. You're talking about a number of other things there. So, but let's address it from just the matrimonial law perspective. If that house is worth nothing, essentially, meaning it's underwater, it's either a negative or it's nothing, then there's nothing to divide. What is there to divide? So now what you've got to determine is, again, more complex conversation, what is the best route for the two of you? And again, we'll talk later on in a little greater detail about how we resolve cases and what the benefits are to try and reach some sort of settlement